Rat would go on like that until Mitchell Sanders couldn't tolerate it any longer. It offended his inner ear. "The story," Sanders would say. "The whole tone, man, you're wrecking it." "Tone?" "The sound. You need to get a consistent sound, like slow or fast, funny or sad. All these digressions, they just screw up your story's sound. Stick to what happened." Frowning, Rat would close his eyes. "Tone," he'd say. "I didn't know it was all that complicated. The girl joined the zoo. One more animal, end of story." "Yeah, fine, but tell it right." At daybreak the next morning, when Mark Fossey heard she was back, he stationed himself outside the fenced-off Special Forces area. All morning he waited for her, and all afternoon. Around dusk, Rat brought him something to eat. "She has to come out," Fossey said. "Sooner or later she has to." Or else what?" Rat said. "I go get her. I bring her out." Rat shook his head. "Your decision. I was you, though. No way I'd mess around with any greeny types. Not for nothing." "It's Mary Ann in there." "Sure, I know that. All the same, I'd knock real extra super polite." Even with the cooling night air, Fossey's face was slick with sweat. He looked sick. His eyes were bloodshot. His skin had a whitish, almost colorless cast. For a few minutes Rat would waited with him, quietly watching the hooch. Then he patted the kid's shoulders and left him alone. It was after midnight when Rat and Eddie Diamond went out to check on him. The night had gone cold and steamy, a low fogging sliding down from the mountains, and somewhere out in the dark they heard music playing, not loud but not soft either. It had a chaotic, almost unmusical sound, without a rhythm or form of progression. Like the noise of nature, a synthesizer it seemed, or maybe an electric organ. In the background, just audible, a woman's voice was half singing, half chanting, but the lyrics seemed to be in a foreign tongue. They found Fossey squatting near the gate in front of the Special Forces area. Head bowed, he was swaying to the music, his face wet and shiny. As Eddie bent down beside him, the kid looked up with dull eyes, ashen and powdery, not quite in register. "Hear that?" he whispered. "You hear? It's Mary Ann." Eddie Diamond took his arm. "Let's get you inside. Somebody's radio. That's all it is. Move it now." "Mary Ann, just listen." "Sure, but listen." Fossey suddenly pulled away, twisting sideways, and fell back against the gate. He lay there with his eyes closed. The music, the noise, whatever it was, came from the hooch beyond the fence. The place was dark except for a small glowing window, which stood partly open, the panes dancing in bright reds and yellows as though the glass were on fire. The chanting seemed louder now, fiercer too, and higher pitched. Fossey pushed himself up. He wavered for a moment, then forced the gate open. "That voice," he said. "Mary Ann." Rat took a step forward, reaching out for him, but Fossey was already moving fast toward the hooch. He stumbled once, caught himself, and hit the door hard with both arms. There was a noise, a short screeching sound, like a cat, and the door swung in, and Fossey was framed there for an instant, his arms stretched out. Then he slipped inside. After a moment Rat and Eddie followed quietly. Just inside the door they found Fossey bent down on one knee. He wasn't moving. Across the room a dozen candles were burning on the floor near the open window. The place seemed to echo with a weird, deep wilderness sound, tribal music, bamboo flutes and drums and chimes. But what hit you first, Rat said, was the smell. Two kinds of smells. There was a topmost sense of joss sticks and incense, like the fumes of some exotic smokehouse, but beneath the smoke lay a deeper and much more powerful stench. Impossible to describe, Rat said. It paralyzed your lungs, thick and numbing, like an animal's den, a mix of blood and scorched hair and excrement and the sweet smut odor of moldering flesh, the stink of the kill. But that wasn't all. On a post at the rear of the hooch was the decayed head of a large black leopard. Strips of yellow-brown skin dangled from the overhead rafters, and bones, stacks of bones all kind. To one side, propped up against a wall, stood a poster in neat black lettering, "Assemble your own gook. Free sample kit." The images came in a swirl, Rat said, and there was no way you could process it at all. Off in the gloom a few dim figures lounged in hammocks or on cots, but none of them moved or spoke. The background music came from a tape deck near the circles of candles, but the high voice was Mary Ann's. After a second, Mark Fossey made a soft moaning sound. He started to get up and then stiffened. "Mary Ann," he said. Quietly then she stepped out of the shadows At least for a moment she seemed to be the same pretty young girl who had arrived a few weeks earlier. She was barefoot, she wore her pink sweater and a white blouse, and a simple cotton skirt. For a long while the girl gazed down at Flossie, almost blankly, and in the candlelight her face had the composure of someone perfectly at peace with herself. It took a few seconds, Rat said, to appreciate the full change. In part it was her eyes, utterly flat and indifferent. There was no emotion in her stare, no sense of the person behind it. But the grotesque part, he said, was her jewelry. At the girl's throat was a necklace of human tongues, elongated and narrow, like pieces of blackened leather. The tongues were threaded along a length of copper wire, one overlapping the next. The tips curled upward as if caught in a final shrill syllable. Briefly, it seemed the girl smiled at Mark Flossie. "There's no sense talking," she said. "I know what you think, but it's not bad." "Bad," Flossie murmured. "It's not." In the shadow there was laughter. One of the greenies sat up and lighted a cigar. The others lay silent. "You're in a place," Marianne said softly, "where you don't belong." She moved her hands in a gesture that encompassed not just the hooch but everything around it, the entire war. The mountains, the mean little villages, the trails and trees and rivers and deep misted over valleys. "You just don't know," she said. "You hide in this little fortress behind wire and sandbags and you don't know what it's all about. Sometimes I want to eat this place, Vietnam. I want to swallow the whole country, the dirt, the death. I just want to eat it and have it there inside me. That's how I feel. It's like this appetite. I get scared sometimes, lots of times, but it's not bad. You know, I feel close to myself when I'm out there at night. I feel close to my own body. I feel my blood moving, my skin and my fingernails, everything. It's like I'm full of electricity, and I'm glowing in the dark. I'm on fire almost. I'm burning away into nothing. But it doesn't matter because I know exactly who I am. You can't feel like that anywhere else." All this was said softly, as if to herself, her voice slow and impassive. She was not trying to persuade. For a few moments she looked at Mark Flossie, who seemed to shrink away. Then she turned and moved back into the gloom. There was nothing to be done. Rat took Flossie's arm, helped him up, and led him outside. In the darkness there was that weird tribal music, which seemed to come from the earth itself, from the deep rainforest, and a woman's voice rising up in a language beyond translation. Mark Flossie stood rigid. "Do something," he whispered. "I just can't let her go like that." Rat listened for a time, then shook his head. "Man, you must be deaf. She's already gone." Rat Kiley stood there almost in mid-sentence, which drove Mitchell Sanders crazy. "What's next?" he said. "Next? The girl, what happened to her?" Rat had a small, tired motion with his shoulders. "Hard to tell for sure. Maybe 3-4 days later, I got ordered to report here to Alpha Company. Jump the first chopper out. That's the last I've ever seen of the place. Marianne, too." Mitchell Sanders stared at him. "You can't do that." "Do what?" "Jesus Christ, it's against the rules," Sanders said. "Against human nature. This elaborate story, you can't say, 'Hey, by the way, I don't know the ending.' I mean, you got certain obligations." Rat gave a quick smile. "Patience, man. Up to now, everything I told you is from personal experience. The exact truth. But there's a few other things I heard secondhand. Third-hand, actually. From here on, it gets to be, I don't know what the word is, speculation." "Yeah, right." Rat looked off to the west, scanning the mountains, as if expecting something to appear on one of the high ridgelines. After a second, he shrugged. "Anyhow, maybe 2 months later, I ran into Eddie Diamond over in Bangkok. I was on R&R, just this fluke thing, and he told me some stuff I can't vouch for with my own eyes. Even Eddie didn't really see it. He heard it from one of the greenies, so you got to take this with a whole shaker full of salt." Once more Rat searched the mountains, then he sat back and closed his eyes. "You know," he said abruptly, "I loved her." "Say again?" "A lot. We all did, I guess. The way she looked, Mary Ann, made you think about those girls back home, how clean and innocent they all are, how they'll never understand any of this, not in a billion years."